is a special announcement. We are heading to RSA conference in San Francisco for our 11th years of coverage, April 28th, May 1st.
And as always, we're bringing you keynotes, conversations with organizers, speakers, industry leaders, plus the latest insights from the world of cybersecurity.
And we'll reconnect with old friends, meet new ones, and of course, we want you and your company to join us.
We have a few spots left for full sponsorship and our on-location briefings. You can book yours now at itspmagazine.com/RSAC.
We're going.
And you're coming with us.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to an episode of Redefining Society and Technology podcast with me, Marco Ciappelli. Today is one of those episodes that I was a little bit indecisive if I wanted to go on audio signals where I tell stories and talk with storytellers, or to stay in the technology and society. And I just made a pick, and we were even talking with a guest here before I started that it could have gone both places. So I don't know, maybe you'll hear it in both places. Wherever you are right now, that's the right place anyway. The story is fascinating and also something that is going to make us think, which is my main objectives. One of my main objectives in doing the podcast, making people think. Sometimes I don't have the answer. The guest doesn't have the answer, but we have enough topics to go over that we hope people will think about what we talk in the episode. And today we're going to talk about something that I love. It's space exploration, it's NASA history, it's the Apollo mission, the going to the moon. I was born in 1969, so I was too little, but that's I identify myself with 1969 and going to the moon as a really, really big thing for us. And many people participated in this incredible adventure, and it was a big effort. A lot of money were invested, a lot of people, they got involved, but maybe not everybody got recognized as much as they should have. And Joanne Higgins, she has a podcast and a story to share that she was already sharing on her podcast, but she wanted to be on my show. I welcome her on my show because I want to hear firsthand what the story is about, why you decided to tell this story on a podcast format, and why do you think it's important. So this is my intro. Now it's your turn, Joanne. Welcome to the show. I'm so pleased for you to be here.
Thank you. I'm very excited, actually, to be here.
Very good. Very good.
And talk about the podcast, yes.
Oh, yeah. We could talk just about podcast in general, but I think we will miss an opportunity to talk about something very, very important. So let's start with a little bit about you. Who are you, what you do, and how you ended up, maybe podcasting and sharing these important stories.
Professionally, I've been a home builder for the last several years. But early in my career, I worked in film and television production.
Okay.
And had hoped to become a journalist, actually. But life took the direction that it took, so that didn't happen. And I was fine with that. I was fine building houses. Then my godfather, who I grew up with, worked in aerospace. He's 95 years old now. So he worked in the beginnings of, before it was even called aerospace. He loves to tell me that story.
Before it was even cool.
Yeah, before it was even called aerospace. He worked in it. they hadn't had a name for it yet. So because he started working for North American Aviation in 1951.
Wow.
So yeah. So I grew up hearing stories of him at work. And I was young. I didn't think a lot about the stories that he was telling me. And when he ended up at the hospital at one point, and I went to visit. And while I was there, one of his old-time colleagues came in, and they started talking about the Apollo launches at Cape Canaveral. And I had not remembered anything about the Apollo launches, him discussing that with me. And it just really piqued my interest. I happened to have a cell phone at the time, and I taped their conversation, which was really candid. And they not only talked about how wonderful it was to be part of that program, but then the conversation shifted to the treatment that they got and the problems that they had, the daily discrimination that they were challenged with. And yeah, so I thought after I got home, I listened to the tape and I thought, wow, I didn't know this and I didn't know that. And I started thinking back to my history and background that I learned in school about the Apollo missions. And they didn't talk about any of that, even though it happened during the height of the civil rights movement.
Right.
And I wasn't even aware that there were people of color involved in it. So I thought, if I don't know this, maybe others don't know it as well. So I started asking my group, just, asking, hey, what do you know about the Apollo program? And then when I would tell them about men of color working in it, they were surprised. So I thought, well, this might be a good podcast, a good way to get their stories out.
Was this before or after the Hidden Figures movie, 2016?
It was after. It was after.
So
because
you kind of had that as, oh, there was that going on, right? I think that
Yes.
was for people that were not connected with somebody like you in the family or friends. That was already like a big revelation to watch that movie, read that book, and so you actually say, you know what, that's a good story. I have another one, and I'm sure there are more.
Yes, there are
Right?
more. I've discovered more in my research, talking to a lot of other people who were involved. Yes.
Right, right. So that's the journalist in you, because I'm picturing you in this room at the hospital and be like, wait a minute, I have I can't record this thanks to technology, and I mean that's a journalistic action and way of thinking right there, and then say, well, maybe there is something you can tell it. Now, when you told the people that were talking about this, your in-law and his friend, were they happy to share this story as it recorded, or it was kind of like, where are you going with this?
No, they were not. They were very reluctant to talk about it because, I mean, like I said, my godfather at that time was in his early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I just focused on him, and he felt no one would be interested. And then I connected with some other engineers that he gave me other people to talk to, and they were not really that interested either. They thought, I did this a long time ago. No one cares about what I did in aerospace.
Yeah.
So I had to convince one gentleman, Nate in particular. I really had to call him and plead with him.
So how did it go in terms of going from the idea? Because now I like to dive into the story on how this became a story. Getting this inspiration, this idea, recording, getting in touch with people, and then actually turn it into reality, which is a podcast that now you have. It's called The Other Moonshot.
Yes.
And it's already out, but probably by the time that I publish this, there's be probably a few episodes out. I know at the time of recording there is at least 2, maybe 3, something like that. So how did you put together the podcast? Were you still connected with the podcast industry?
No, I was
No.
not. I had
So you
no
pitched
connection
it.
with it. No connection with it. I just knew. I thought the best way to do it was through a podcast, and at the time, I thought the easiest. I learned neither one of those were quite exactly true.
To a certain extent. To a certain
Yes.
extent.
What I felt was a good public radio, I thought, would serve it best. And I live in Los Angeles, and we have 2 public radio stations, and one of them I listen to all the time. So I had set my sights on that one. I just focused on, okay, that's who I'm going to get. So I started going to their events that they would have. And at one of the events I went to, I sat next to a wonderful woman who's now my partner. And we just started small talking, and I shared the story with her. And she liked the story. And then I find out later that she was a senior news editor for the public radio station. So we collaborated, and she pitched it to them, and they greenlit it.
Nice. Very good. I love that. So what's the story? Let's dive into that. So they still are, but they were engineer in the 60s, working at NASA, working on the Apollo mission. And my understanding is that they were they were a very relevant role for the success of the mission. So give me the background of their position at the time in the story.
Okay. My godfather first, as I mentioned, he started in the 1950s. Before it was aerospace, he was working on designing bombers, parts for aircraft bombers. And then when North American Aviation got the contract to design elements of the Apollo, they got the contract to design the second stage rocket and the command module, which are 2 really important parts of the rocket. Yes. So my godfather was put on that program that was designing that. And I love the story he tells me is that at that time in the beginning, NASA had written on a piece of paper, build us something to get us within the vicinity of the moon. That's all they had.
Right. I mean, just like, hey.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You go with that.
Yeah, right. And look what they did. I mean, that's what was the germ of an idea, right? And that's what they came up with. He was tasked with this process of configuration management, which is like, it's how you identify the different parts of the rocket. Because when a rocket goes up in space, if something happens, you can't really get it back. So each piece has like numbers with it that help identify what the part was and what it actually does. So that was something he actually developed, and then oversaw. And it was very important because nothing could be designed, actually manufactured, without him stamping that it was indeed what the paperwork said.
Wow.
So that it was a very, very important position.
Absolutely.
And then, and my godfather's name was Charlie Cheatham. And Nathaniel Levert worked in rocket propulsion. And he helped create what makes the rocket go. And Shelby Jacobs, also an engineer, he did a couple of different things, but the thing that he's most known for is a camera system that was attached to the rocket that actually took a photo, the first photo of the curvature of Earth from space. Wow. So they all did really incredible things.
Okay, so tell me this, because that's where my mind started to go in a lot of different direction, and be like, you do all of this, and you got crickets, right? Like, nobody's going to actually attach your name to the big project. That would not happen if you didn't contribute to that, or maybe it would have happened in a different way, somebody else's way of taking care of it. Maybe it would have succeed, maybe will succeed. I mean, success can happen in a lot of different ways, but they were definitely part of that. And so all of a sudden, though, we get to the moon, we go back to the moon, then there's no budget to go to the moon, but that's a different story for people that want to hear the history of NASA. And they just realized, or maybe they knew it already at the time, that they were not going to be in the movie, right? I mean, in the production, their credits, right. If you want to do a reference to movie, they were not even credited for it. And tell me, like, how they felt about it, beside the fact that they didn't even want to then go and talk about it again.
Yeah, that it's interesting how you put it. They never expected to get any credit because, of course, they work as a team.
Right.
But what they didn't expect was to constantly fight to do their jobs.
There you go. Okay.
And to be respected and paid equally to their white counterparts. They didn't expect that. Or for their job, when they solved a problem, for someone else to take the credit for it. There. They didn't expect those things. Okay. And those were the constant things that they had to experience.
So that's me thinking there was an environment that was somehow okay, but then you don't get the recognition. So I kind of jumped the gun there and I went to the end of it. But the truth is, what actually was happening while you're doing this important work, you also have to work in an environment that is just not
hostile.
Yeah,
hostile. It was a hostile environment, which is why we call it the Other Moonshot, because there was the moonshot, which was this incredible world experience. And then there was the moonshot that was their social experience. And they were, all of these men were very often more qualified than their bosses.
Yeah.
Especially educationally. They had more education.
So in a way, in order to be there, they needed to be way better in order to get the job that a lot of people would have got, not being as qualified, which is the story that is repeating today for, when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and all those important things that I think we tend to just forget and brush and kind of like put under the rug. But the truth is that. Has it changed, in your opinion, for the
No.
best? No.
Well, well, of course. I mean, we've definitely made headway. What's been interesting for me with the podcast and doing events and getting to talk to young engineers now, they're telling me that they're having some similar experiences, not as extreme as my men.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure part of that is because of the period that my men came up in. I mean, all my men actually grew up in Jim Crow period and then transitioned into aerospace. So they grew up in a period where they were treated less than, and then ended up in this huge program where they were also treated less than.
Right. So here's one connection with technology. When we were talking at the beginnings, like, how we're telling a story, if there is a connection with technology. Well, I'm going to give it to you right now, because I do a lot of work with the cybersecurity industry. And if there is one thing that I also discuss is the diversity and inclusion aspect, because it's an industry where there is actually a lack of resources in terms of people needed in the industry, but there is this gap between the job available and the people doing it. There is also much more male, white oriented versus women inclusion and diversity and different kind of people. And when I talk to people that work for organizations that want, obviously, to promote this, everybody's telling me that when the team is diverse in every possible way, it's a better team. You come up with better idea, you come up with better solutions, you can think outside of the box compared with when you work with a team that is homogeneous. And that would work in different aspects. So I'm thinking like this contribution that they brought to the table, again, it could have been something that maybe other people would have not come up with. And it's hard to hear that nowadays still we build a technology that is much so not inclusive in the term of the people that work on the project and actually the people that then receive the technology. Am I making any sense that there's
Yes.
there a connection with kind of
Yes.
like the story that you're also presenting?
Yes. I at first I thought it might not be relevant for years now. And then I've learned it is still quite relevant.
Right. So tell me about these feedbacks a little bit more. So you go out there, they hear you at the podcast, and you go to this event, and I'm sure first thing you hear probably is, I had no idea. Right? And then
Yes, I do.
right. So that's how it starts. And then what else? I mean, what are you helping, on your opinion, achieving with sharing these stories?
Adding to the history, to a very established history, because everyone knows about aerospace, and with the way the industry's transitioned with the companies that SpaceX and Blue Horizon, there's a lot of interest in space. And as the men always say to me, what's happening now is what we started. They're using a lot of the technology that we ushered. In fact, I mean, as I was doing my research, so many of the things that have just ballooned technically started as a result of trying to send men to the moon. our cell phones, one of the big ones, because they had to learn to really minimize things to go up in space. They couldn't be big and bulky. So that's when they started making things, really trying to see how small they could get things. And the result now is, these cell phones that we carry in our pockets, in our purses. So
computers and medicine, remote medicine, telemedicine, that something happened out there and there is a delay in the way you communicate. There is not a doctor on board. I mean, we're talking about things that could happen when you go to Mars, where you do have, much longer even delay in the communication. So
right. GPS.
The GPS.
Yes. I mean, there's these guys, that technology started with aerospace and going to the moon.
Yeah. And the problem solving, right? I mean, I know from reading some of the books about the space program that even the rendezvous concept wasn't even an option until towards the end. I mean, the idea was we get a rocket, we land it on the moon, and then we take off again. And people were like, yeah, but it's too heavy to land to start with. So I love how you presented it. It's like, okay, we need to get in the vicinity of the moon.
Yes. They weren't they weren't planning. They hadn't really decided if they wanted to land or not.
Think about the responsibility for doing that kind of job and the pressure that they were living with. What other things are you learning by telling this story? Because here's the thing, like as a podcaster myself, I feel like every time I have a conversation, I'm just learning something new. Every episode, it's like I'm reading a book. Like, so I'm sure as you go, you probably found yourself into unveiling certain concept and stories that you haven't even had idea, or maybe even your thinking was changing as you were building, with the production and with the guest and writing the story. What how did evolve your way of thinking about this?
One big thing I learned that I had no idea that I was remotely interested in is that I like science.
You didn't know that? Okay.
No, in fact, I completely always avoided science because I'm not very good at math. So I always thought, I can't really be any type of a scientist or care that much about it because I'm so math challenged. And I learned science is a lot of different things and that I actually like it. And I like history. So I also learned that science and history can collide. And that's one of the big things about the podcast that I've experienced is I was curious about this period of time in Los Angeles and to find out that all of this happened in this city that I grew up in was just amazing. And I learned that the aerospace industry in Los Angeles helped create a Black middle class. That was a big thing that I learned.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because that's another good connection between society and technology and the other way around. So can you tell me more about that?
I knew we had the Great Migration, and a lot of people of color came from the South and came here. But I was curious about what kind of jobs they were able to get. And because of the aerospace industry and the mandate that was part of the aerospace industry, there was a mandate because it was a taxpayer program. So that meant they had to allow everybody, especially people of color, to be part of it. That allowed people who were getting educations, Black people who had been to a war and had gotten an education, it allowed them to work in an industry that provided security for them. They were able to get insurance, be part of credit unions. All of those things create middle classes. So the aerospace industry was very much responsible in Los Angeles for creating middle class communities for people of color.
That's an interesting perspective. But you mentioned something at the beginning where, at a certain point, they found out that they were even making as close as what other people were making. So
Yes,
it thankfully was a positive thing that happened, but it was far, obviously, from perfect. Nobody would have probably believed it was perfect, but that's another reason why it wasn't, and there was a big disparity there.
yes, there was. And they found out about it, and they did what you do when you find out about those disparities. They organized and protested and tried to get it changed, but it was never changed for them.
It was.
They continued throughout their careers to work in the industry, always getting less than their white counterparts.
Were they? I mean, did people, you say, created the middle class, but also I'm feeling like that it probably motivated kids, the younger generation, to look up at them, get them as an inspirational story, to say, well, if they broke those glass ceiling, and we can do that too. So go to school, become an engineer, dream one day to work in that industry as well. Do you think it got easier?
That was one of the things that I used to convince the men to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And as it has turned out, I have personally been privy to some young engineers who actually these men have inspired. A couple of them had they had mentorships where they inspired other young engineers. So yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how do they feel now? That do they listen to the podcast?
Yes, we had a listening session
Okay.
where they got to listen to episode 1 with their families.
Nice.
And it was quite amazing for them. I mean, they got very emotional about it.
I bet.
The other thing that I had learned from the families while I was interviewing them were family members would say to me, wow, I never knew this story, because these men, they were engineers. They went to work. When they came home, they didn't talk about their work. Right. And they definitely didn't talk about discrimination or anything like that with their families. And they were really happy to be on this program that was world known. So now they're actually talking about emotionally their feelings, how they felt. And that has been just eye-opening for not only me, but their own families.
I love it. And I love how you need to have, everybody has a story. Every job, I believe, is important. It's kind of like, this is rocket science. So that's really, brain surgery, rocket science, right? But also, I like to think that it doesn't matter what you do. Your job is important. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a job. It's important for society in a way or in another. But when you actually get more of the spotlight in something that, I mean, yeah, it went we went to the moon because of that. So it there is definitely a more I'm not gonna say interesting, but definitely a story that resonate a little bit. The echoes a little bit more far. So their contribution
Reverberates.
actually in sharing it and your contribution in sharing it, I think it's exactly this. It's to let people know about it. I didn't know about it. Now I know. And hopefully other people that have been listening to the podcast, mine and your podcast, obviously, they will know about it and maybe they'll share it. So I would like for you. Actually, I want to end with two things. One, we'll do it at the end. I want you to do a little pitch for inviting people to listen to the podcast. But before we go there, I am assuming that from the way you talk about it, that you did like doing this. I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I can tell it from your face that maybe you have some other ideas. So I want to know, does this kind of awake even more the journalist in you? Do you have any other project in mind after this?
It definitely awoke the sleeping journalist. Like when you wake the sleeping giant, though, you got to get out of the way, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
you don't get stepped on.
Mhm.
So it has, yeah, because I hadn't seen myself really doing it. Yeah. So I have some other ideas.
Okay.
Yeah, thinking about podcasting and building.
Okay. That as they say, talk what you know about.
Exactly. Or they also say stories you want to tell are usually right near you,
Right. True.
which is what I discovered personally.
And you had no idea, so that's
No.
that's really really cool. So okay, so I don't want you to tell me what's in your mind, but maybe one day when you figure it out what the next story is going to be, maybe you'll come back and share it with me and with our audience. And yeah, now I love for you to really, in your own words, invite people to listen to the Other Moonshot.
Well, I would like very much for people to listen to the Other Moonshot and discover what I discovered about three amazing Black engineers in the 1950s and 1960s who helped send America to the moon.
I think that's a good story to learn about. And I hope that everybody enjoy the way that we share this here on Redefining Society and Technology podcast. I sure had a good time with you, Joanne, and I'm very honored that you came here and shared the story. And I can't wait to go and listen myself to your story. And then maybe we'll get back on it again when on your next story, or maybe that will trigger me to talk more about this story as well, as I love all that you share with me today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really such a pleasure.
All righty, same here. And for everybody else, stay tuned, subscribe, and there'll be many more stories coming to you from Redefining Society and Technology podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Marco.
Bye.
Black Cloak provides concierge cybersecurity protection to corporate executives and high net worth individuals to protect against hacking, reputational loss, financial loss, and the impacts of a corporate data breach. Learn more at blackcloak.io.
Sean,
Marco,
we are here to deliver a message from the RSA conference team.
it's an important message from our friends. RSA Conference 2025 just around the corner, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. We invite everybody else to be there April 28th through May 1st. You can secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG25. That's ITSPMAG25. See you all there.
I'll be there. See you there.